So I'm gonna continue on from that that bit on Jordan Peterson, lecture 7. It's classified as and so the next quote in the introduction to the book under the important little warning label is the Slavoj Zizek quote. The one measure of true love is you can insult the other. So, it's a great I don't know, relief to have at least somebody on the left who who is willing to take that kind of stance. I mean, well, that's a funny way of putting it, because I mean, obviously, I don't know, the left generally, all they do is insult the other, but I don't know whether it's from true love or what. But obviously the tendency towards political correctness and censorship, rather flies in the face of this kind of thinking by the leftist philosopher Slavoj Zizek. So it would be, it's just so foundational, in my opinion, to any kind of civilized society, any kind of functioning society, to have the ability to say whatever you like, because if things are not allowed to be said, all that does is ferment grievances. All it does is ferment hatred and ferment grievances. Just because somebody's not allowed to say something, doesn't make their skewed mindset or what's behind it go away. It does the opposite. It causes it to fester, and it causes resentment, and and it cements antagonisms which are not allowed to be openly aired and worked out. It's as is very often said, it's immensely arrogant, for and illogical, to bar people from saying things and offering different points of opinion to your own. I don't know. It's difficult almost to. It's upsetting to even have to justify this position. Ironically, because what I'm talking about is praising open dialogue and free speech, etc. But to have to justify free speech and simply not shutting other people up who you disagree with. Well, I mean, has society sunk that low? If you're in a house with somebody, and they say something you don't like, well, you don't pin them to the ground and muzzle them, do you? Well, yeah, some people do, psychiatrists, but that wouldn't generally be thought of as a raising of the discourse. Pinning somebody to the ground and muzzling them isn't raising the discourse. It's not raising the tone of society. locking somebody up, sending somebody to prison for saying something you don't like. It's not raising the discourse and raising the level of society. It's not raising civility. um, so big kudos to Zizek for taking such a in fact a valiantly brazen and bold way of phrasing it, with the statement, one true measure is you can insult the other. Well, I mean, I hope he's not trying to justify, all the crazed leftists shouting the word racist at people, with this insult the other business. But it seems like he's coming from, very much, a better place, and with better intentions than most people with this. And I'd like to say even more about this, but I'm not sure I should, because I have my opinions about this are I don't know, very rebellious and very because I always invert things. I take if somebody says you're not allowed to do something to me, I will generally do the opposite, or not actually do the opposite, but I really want to do the opposite. And so um, the one measure of true love is you consult the other. Well, this also ties in with a kind of a Christian notion that you kind of you do good in secret. You do good in secret. So yeah, you portray a bad guy image, but not because you're a bad guy, but because well, maybe it's dangerous to be seen as to be too good and too much of a nice guy in the world. So um, so you, as I say in one of my poems, you conceal your love behind crude acts and gestures. It's because the surface and what lies under it are often in direct opposition, and sometimes people who are kind of yeah, I mean, in our society, I mean, somebody who is actually a genuinely good person, who really, who really cares about fighting injustice and evil, well, they're going to get pilloried. They're going to get labeled as a very wicked person. And lots of things they do, like being very angry at others. They might be very angry at others because, well, anger and so-called hatred are not in themselves, to a truly moral person, to a right-thinking person, they're not objections, and they're not wicked, they're not wrong. Uh, you know, a certain amount of anger, or any kind of anger, it's a question of personality more than anything. As long as it's as far as it's being used to actually fight injustice and evil, and tell the truth. Well, all these things, are likely to be very, very highly justified. Yet, in our society, somebody's immediately going to get, accused of stirring up hatred, or hate speech, or they're going to think, oh, this person is thinks he's better than us. He's telling us what to do. He's holier than thou. People who express anger are draw attention to injustices. Well, they're often very popular because they actually draw attention to the crimes of others, or the crimes of a whole society. And obviously that gets you're generally hated in many respects. So, um, I don't know. That's not the main thrust of this quote by Zizek, but it's just something to bear in mind that um, that it's pretty much a truism that if you really want to do good in society and make positive change in society, well, you often do have to be prepared to get hated for it. Uh, um, so moving on from that quote, because I think I said too much about that already. Just setting up my own steam. Um, Although, actually, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that quote actually warrants more attention, more thinking about, because I mean, let's ask. Why is it necessary to actually insult the other? I mean, why can't it just be, you can tell them the honest to God truth. Um, the thing is, I mean, if if you're actually insulting somebody, I mean, although I love the quote because it so much flies in the face of the hypocrisy of today. To actually be, to be a bit more objective and analyze it both ways. Um, I mean, if you are already insulting somebody and you really do have a will to insult them, um, is that true love? Is that compatible with true love? How is that compatible with true love? I mean, he says that you can insult the other, so it's not like you will be insulting the other, a lot necessarily, but just as enough trust there to tolerate, some insult. Um, um, but I don't know. Is it then that the bonds of affection are going to be strained and they're going to tolerate the insult. They're going to be a bit weakened by the insult, and then just about remain intact, or is it more of even a positive kind of criteria? Um, I mean, how is insult compatible with love? The way I think of it, I think it is compatible because, well, I see in my own warped mind, I often see insults as kind of mock insults. They're not real insults; they're mock insults. They're things that you throw at one another as a kind of raillery to just kind of entertain one another and to kind of strengthen one another. Um, it's if you if you can insult one another, well, I mean, and you do insult one another, that's you know the the ironic thing there is that in a way it is actually reinforcing the bond and reinforcing the love, because what that's kind of because what that is doing is actually giving the other person the chance to suffer for their love and to prove their love and their loyalty, and that that potentially strengthens love. It doesn't weaken it at all, because on the one hand, the person who is throwing the insults, well, they're going to feel that the other person is more loyal to them as a result of them tolerating and accepting their so-called insults in good faith, and with a in good humor. And on the other hand, the person who is suffering for the other person is is kind of doubling down and reinvesting in their love. So that strengthens love. That's what long I don't know, epic kind of love affairs and romances often seem to involve. There's it's suffering for one another and being kind of warriors, fighting on the same front, but also perhaps occasionally testing one another, um, as much as just flowers and sunshine. um, so that is a deep meaning of this quote for me, which I really like. Um, But on the other hand, I mean, there's a genuine tension there. If you really love somebody, do you feel inclined to insult them? Do you feel the need to insult them? If you insult them, does it, under what conditions does it make the relationship, as I was saying, actually stronger? And in what conditions does it make it weaker? um, because it seems, to me, it's clear, very, very set in my thinking that one very deep motivation and inspiration for love is a real tight knit sharing of common values. It's not just some kind of fuzzy multicultural tolerance. That's not if that's love, well, it's if it's possible for that to be love, it's not that's not how it commonly manifests, and that is not the main or only or most natural understanding of what binds people together, under the strong emotional attachment, which is called love. So normally there would be a great deal of agreement between people who actually love one another. And I mean, obviously, I mean, just to expand on that a bit, I mean, there are different types of agreement. There's agreement of ideas and politics, or philosophy, social matters, intellectual matters, and then maybe there are other types of agreement which are kind of more instinctual and you know it's commonly known that people who look alike often attracted to one another. So you know there's there's just an agreement in your very being, um, and by agreement I don't just mean there's there's people you're okay with one another, but you really share a commonality. You really believe and stand for the same things. This is, this notion they try hard to demonize it and repress it in our ideological environment. But this is a core part of being human. Forming alliances with those who share the same loyalties, both natural and intellectual, political. So yeah, so I mean, if you're insulting the other, well, I mean, indicates there's a disagreement there, and in a way, that is the opposite of love. I mean, I would say this is it's a very blanket statement. It's a very, very general statement. I mean, in fact, there are lots of different types of love. Belong to lots of different types of people, and in some cases, it may be more true that the relationship is amenable to insult, and in fact, invites and benefits from certain amount of tension and like dynamic tension. Whereas others, they won't at all. I mean, obviously, coming again from a Christian point of view, I mean, the idea that if somebody simply insults you, that you would, blacklist them, and and take them off your, your list of, your list of the human species. Is obviously from a Christian point of view that is just ridiculous, because it's very important, not just from a Christian point of view, but from a general human point of view. I mean, just rationally, to be able to tolerate and accept, smaller kind of smaller transgressions against oneself. So a verbal transgression, a mere verbal transgression, which doesn't do any material damage, any concrete damage, or very, very, very little. It is irrational and certainly unchristian to kind of blacklist the person for that, because because there are always going to be disagreements with other people, and the way you actually achieve progress and reconciliation, there's usually a chance, a very big chance for reconciliation amongst people who show genuine goodwill. So, when somebody insults you, you show them goodwill, and they will be impressed by that. If not conscious, if they don't admit it, they will still often be impressed by that at an unconscious level, and it will serve you well in the long term, both perhaps in your relationship with the person who insulted you and in general. So you tolerate minor transgressions and grievances for the sake of long-term reconciliation. and particularly if you're in a strong position and you are kind of the mature party, you think that you're in the right. You're more intelligent than they are, perhaps, and therefore, you have to be tolerant with them, being a bit quick to insult you now and then because they simply don't understand. And by your forbearance and your intelligence, you can win them over in the longer term. So I mean, anybody who doesn't show this characteristic, is prima facie, not very intelligent and not very strong, and they probably, don't know what they're talking about. Anybody who does not tolerate insult, verbal insult, they are they're showing that they're irrational and that they don't have faith in themselves to win people over in the long term, through um, through debate, through open dialogue. But I mean, it's also important to consider, when might it actually be, beneficial to insult the other? When might it be the morally right thing to do to insult the other? Not just that, you tolerate it because you're so loving and beneficent and magnificent, but because, but you actually throw insults because the other person, I don't know, deserves it in some way. Or it might be beneficial in some way. I mean, when is throwing an insult an act of love? Well, I've already gone into that a bit, but what are the circumstances? Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say that anything where you're actually standing up for a very real moral issue where there's lots of human suffering involved, which you're trying to decrease or reduce. You're trying to reduce real human suffering. Then, in those circumstances, it's always better to throw an insult, or it's always justified to throw an insult than it is to say nothing. You know, it may be better to say things in a more diplomatic way, or it may not. But it's always better and more moral to throw an insult than it is to say nothing and to keep quiet. So let's say, I mean, you just believe that whether you're right or wrong, but you believe that eating meat, say, is an absolute holocaust, like Morrissey, believes, he compares, the meat industry to to concentration camps and that kind of thing, very very literally and seriously, and and I suppose that that could be considered an insult to a lot of people. In the meat industry, for instance. Um, But would he be obliged to mince words with on that issue? Um, or would mincing words be, be an injustice to all the poor animals? Um, um, by any sane and fair measure, it seems obvious that Morrissey is far more morally praiseworthy in insulting the meat industry than and then thereby drawing attention to the atrocious suffering of billions of animals than people who don't say anything. But um, if he didn't use such strong language, he didn't make his objections so plain, then people wouldn't reach people. Because people generally they often need to have things spelled out for them, especially if somebody's trying to introduce a new custom, like Morrissey. He's saying don't eat meat. They're trying to introduce a radical change to society and the way people behave. Well, that requires changing people's minds, and to change people's minds, you have to communicate things, very clearly. Um, and um, I mean, so what is an insult? I mean, is an insult just anything which, portrays somebody in a very bad light? Is an insult just a criticism which, moralizes and condemns the person, in stark terms? Um, I mean, people who want to enact change in society, particularly want to enact change through the power of the word, through speaking, like philosophers like Zizek, they would generally be much more amenable to legitimizing insult or very, very strong criticism than people who just want to preserve the status quo. So, I mean, part of thinking that insult and very severe, vehement criticism is necessary and justified. Um, it goes hand in hand with actually believing that there are terrible, terrible injustices in our current society, which we need to be allowed to insult and criticize. Whereas people who don't want those injustices recognized or don't believe in them, don't believe they exist, they're going to see, insult and severe criticism as, just doing harm either to their own interests or, maybe in fact in their own minds, they really believe that, these are kind of, dangerous radicals and rebels who are going to actually kind of, upset God's order, of the way society is at the moment. They're going to do harm through their drawing extreme criticism and insult to things which, actually a part of unnecessary or justified. uh, so I mean, we can see this quote in a slightly other another dimension, in that um, we could phrase it, in order for a true love to come about, or a society of genuine justice and love to come about, we definitely need to be able to insult others, because society at the moment is so unloving and so full of injustice that we really, really do need to very severely criticize it in order to reach, a state which is, even reasonably could be reasonably be considered loving and bearable. Um, um, so for somebody who views society as an absolute cesspit of atrocities, routine atrocities, and um, just ordinary inhumanity of man against man. I mean, for somebody who views society in that light, um, then his entire love of humanity and his entire love of society and his love of others is going to be premised on his insults, his insulting of that society, and his insulting of humanity, and his insulting of others. Because what he loves, or the nature of his love, is that it's where he wants to get them to. It's where he wants to, take them to a better place. Their potential, their untapped potential. True love, in fact, it always looks towards potential, right? It's, well, surely if you love somebody, well, that is goes 100% hand in hand with trying to help them realize their full potential. It's not loving them in their, self-destructive, qualities, in such a way that you simply reinforce their own misery. Somebody's miserable, it's not loving their misery, or at least not exactly that, or not mainly 100% that. If you love somebody being miserable, if somebody's miserable and you love them, just as they are, so to speak, in the sense that you love them being miserable, well, that's not very loving, or it's 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 um it's not necessarily the ideal form of love. Uh, so for somebody who sees society as enormously flawed and has boundless pity for this poor suffering humanity, um, they are often actually going to be the first to insult it, and the most vehement you know critics of it. um, and in our society today, they would probably be construed as a hateful monster because there's a there's an attempt to suppress and repress the notion of the good. Um, there's been a over the last decades or a few hundred years, there's been a move away from talk of good and evil and the good, pursuing the good or pursuing happiness even, and instead, there's an attempt to muddy the water with replacement sort of notions, um, such as what we have now today as hate, love and hate. It's it's totally undemonstrated, at least to me, or to anybody in their education system, which I've passed through, that that hate and love are the primary qualities that one should be looking for, because it's much more. It seems much more like an attempt to muddy the water and distract away from the legitimate dichotomy, which is good and evil. Because somebody who actually stands up for people who are enormously suffering and grave injustices in society, well, they could come off as full of hate. They could be they're vehemently condemning thousands or millions of people, but they're doing it for the sake of righting injustices and ameliorating the suffering of the victims. it's it's a complete dumbing down and lobotomizing of the discourse to talk in terms of love and hate and notions like hate speech. Um, um, what is the basis of this? I mean, does it have any rational basis whatever? Or is it just complete, ideological programming and garbage intended to corrupt the minds of the population and protect wrongdoers from legitimate accusation? So I mean, let's just draw attention to that point. Again, and very clearly, in a way, it can be very, very, very loving to insult the other. Especially if the other is easily insulted, um, because true love for other people, it's really is much more. Just to draw attention to this very, very basic point, which is seemingly not hardly recognized by even the vast majority of people nowadays, that really loving somebody is loving their potential. It's loving them in terms of their potential. So you know to criticize somebody is actually showing them, it's giving them your valuable attention. It means you still see potential in them, that they are worth criticizing. um and like I say, insult is just, it seems to be almost just just another word for very severe moral criticism. um I mean, does it does it do good to throw just cheap insults at somebody, which don't really clarify the issue. Um, no, it's probably just a diversionary tactic by people who aren't capable of actually reasoning, very well, and winning the argument in rational terms, usually. Um, on the other hand, I mean, there could be kind of inverse snobbery, an inverse snobbery, whereby um, so not inverse snobbery, just kind of snobbery, whereby if somebody uses a motive or unflattering, what are generally considered to be very unflattering words, then they get marked down in the discussion, or written off. Um, that doesn't particularly seem to make sense either, because you know it remains an open question whether strong language and severe moral criticism is justified in any particular case anyway. And the fact that somebody uses so-called crude and vulgar words or something like that, it doesn't mean that they don't also provide extremely important arguments. It seems like a red herring. Um, it's like saying that if somebody just uses any word or speaks with a certain accent or something like that, therefore they can't also make good arguments. um, I think in general it's more a matter of trying to preserve the status quo and dampen down strong vocal criticism, moral criticism of others. Um, but on the other hand, is there anything loving in the constant insults and verbal abuse that you get from people on the left, like racist, bigots, um, transphobe, Islamophobe, um, homophobe, uh, xenophobe, um, all this cheap weaponized language, which is an excuse not to think and actually spell things out in rational terms, but to simply intimidate somebody with a unpopular epithet. Is there any love in that? I mean, can we love our enemies and see some good in what they're trying to do there? The thing is, yeah, it's not really. There's not much love in it because for a critique or a criticism to be called, in any way loving, it probably has to be, quite accurate and subtle and valid and show some actual will to clarify the issue, for the other person. How does calling somebody a racist or calling them a transphobe, how does that clarify the issue for the person? In a way that they're not already aware that their views are, hated. It doesn't clarify anything. All it does is slander them. So it doesn't really attempt to help the other person. How does it attempt to help the other person anyway? It's difficult to see how it does. I mean, it's just a kind of laziness and will to demonize others. Whereas if somebody is to point out to somebody on the left, the legitimate fears about Islam or about cutting up little children's genitals, then I mean that seems to show a bit more. That shows a lot more will to really clarify the issue and get to the heart of it and really help the other person see it more clearly. Uh, I mean, if a leftist, wants to go into some kind of highfalutin, philosophical justification for the leftist ideologies, of multiculturalism and I don't know, anti-racism, sexual, experimentation, and gender fluidity. If they want to go into some complex philosophical argument for that, then I will credit them. And I'll say that there's some love in that. There could be some love in that, and um, and they're genuinely trying to assist the other to understand things to some degree. But just throwing these highly slanderous words at people. Um, it seems driven much more by hatred and spite than any real love. Yeah, but um, I mean, under better circumstances, it would still be 100% tolerable, and um, it would be um, beginning of dialogue. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, one thing I think you get is that the first way that dialogue is initiated between people of differing views is quite likely to be through insult because they start off, in their own position, separated from that of others, and they there is that initial disagreement there between their views, and then as they begin to communicate, talk with one another. I mean, initially there'll be the strongest disagreement, and then they'll communicate, and then they'll begin to work it out and see that the other person isn't so alien and so other as they initially anticipated. Um, as the dialogue goes on. So the attempt to actually prevent insult in the first place is really shutting down the whole the very beginning and premise of the whole conversation. Um, if somebody's not allowed to air their true views to another person, Well, it prevents them from being authentic. It prevents the dialogue from being authentic and promoting authentic reconciliation. Ironically, that is, the thing which, is in fact seemingly most best calculated to produce mounting antagonism and frustration. If you feel you're not allowed to say exactly what you mean with somebody else, you're going to hold resentment to that other person exactly while you're talking to them. And that's quite likely to just mount until you're allowed to actually say what you really mean. And then if you're allowed to say it, well, first of all, the very fact that you're allowed to say it will stop you from resenting the other person so much, holding a grievance against them. And it also will begin to allow you to reflect on the nature of that opinion and how you appear to the other person. And also, allow them actually an opportunity to come back at you and to, on your own terms, explain to you why you may not be correct. So that was Mad Max with lectures from Gaslit by a Madman on philosophy, madness, and society. Thanks for listening, and I really hope you heed what I'm saying and are better educated next time. Thank you.